Chapter 5 The Two Majors. The oldest major, both in age and the length of time he had lived in Potato, was our neighbour. This octogenarian was the husband of Maria, the slight figure in whose extended hands of friendship the gift of giant cabbages had been proffered to us upon our arrival in our Portuguese village. Maria's husband, Manel, was not a major at all, and it was only Stephen and I who called him that by name, just one of the many nicknames we'd created for our neighbours during our first few months in Potato. There were so many Manels that we needed a way to distinguish between them when talking amongst ourselves. And our closest neighbour had been given his title by Stephen even before we'd bought our home in Portugal. The 80-something held himself straight-backed and proud. Most days, weather permitting, he would spend hours in his fields, tidying up his grapevines or hoeing between whatever seasonal vegetables he, his wife and daughters were growing at that time. After lunch, as the heat of summer afternoons became too fierce to work in, he passed an hour or two on the veranda which ran the width of his house. The shelter he received there from an old grapevine which covered the 1.5-metre deep concrete viewing platform spread out over the front yard before extending its reach even further to the wall the other side of the narrow lane. It was the above scene that was one of the first images to fix itself into Stephen's mind, and the one which led to the man's nickname. Letting his imagination take over, Stephen created the personality of a retired army officer whose apparent slumber was mere illusion, hiding an ever-alert iron mind. At the side of the sleeping figure's chair was a rifle, which lay just out of sight, and an unseen finger which rested on the trigger. As we got to know our neighbour, the image of the retired army man with a gun which could be swiftly and expertly aimed at anyone or anything which threatened his afternoon doze faded. But the ever-watchful eye, despite fierce claims to the contrary, proved to be a fact. The true name of the other major who lived in Potato was in fact Patrick, and he was a duck. He was one of two birds that we had taken home from the market within the first few months of settling into our new life. Patrick was a big bird that had beautiful white feathers, their purity emphasised by just a slight detail of shiny black on his head, which made him look as though he wore a beret. Adding to this military illusion, a limp which alluded to an injury picked up during some long-forgotten military campaign. But those who had witnessed the battle recalled a less heroic incident, one which involved some runner beans and a greedy bird that had got his foot entangled in the wire fence while bobbing up and down in order to eat the fresh green vegetables. Another duck had left the market with Patrick that day, a female that we'd bought for some eggs, and for a brief while there was the possibility of ducklings, but instead of gains, the feathered family had suffered a loss, and the male duck had found himself alone. This memory of how Stephen had yearned for the birds in Portugal to have babies had surfaced just a few days earlier. We were in Devon, and we'd been observing a couple of geese and their goslings wander across a lawn near Exeter Cathedral. As we did so, Stephen spent a minute or two painting the picture of Patrick being followed by half a dozen waddling ducklings. After Patrick's mate had died, we had tried to set the duck up with a new bird. By this time, we had added a chicken to our garden, and though I had maintained for a while that having ducklings around was not very practical, I had eventually given in to Stephen's argument that at least having a female duck would provide the eggs we wanted. So, one Wednesday morning, we'd set off the weekly farmers' market and had bought another baby duck. But not for the first time, things did not go accordingly to plan, and the familia at the Casa dos Ingleses became another notch funnier. Peggy's introduction to Patrick was doomed from the beginning. Whether Trilby, the resident hen, had been guarding her position as the matriarch, or whether it was the food supply she was guarding, cannot be said. But she acted with speed and efficiency when the other bird had arrived. The newcomer did not know what, literally, had hit her when the scaly dinosaur-like feet of the hen propelled a hefty body in its direction, and within seconds, Trilby's hard, sharp beak had torn into the soft, leathery one of the smaller bird. For quite a while after the incident, Peggy and the hen occupied different corners of their home, akin to boxing opponents resting between rounds in their own corners of the boxing ring. Patrick tried to make sense of the events occurring around him, but despite his greater size and age, he was not a confident creature, and appeared to Stephen and me not to be at all interested in cozying up with a new mate. Peggy was not blameless in the ill-fated love match, and one of the new family members' peculiarities that she was a water bird that had no love for getting wet. The duck did seem fascinated by the pond that was in the smaller bird enclosure, but when you watched her, it was as if she was admiring herself in the mirror rather than preparing to dive in. There she would stand, her head at just enough of an angle to see into the still dark water, and in that position she would begin swaying her head gently. The duck's action made her appear as if she was wearing a pair of long dangling diamond-cut earrings, which she could see reflecting the sun's rays, her head movement sending the light bouncing around her home. A living disco ball. Peggy's fear of the water put an end to any ideas the male bird had about romance. The moonlight swims were forgotten, along with the family planning, and when the old war veteran started showing signs of anxiety at the other bird's presence, the Englishman who had taken Stephen and I, who had taken Peggy to the unusual garden, decided to take her away from it. One morning, in late spring, us two and the duck travelled the 20 or so kilometres from home to the city of Queenborough. Along the banks of the river, under the shade of trees and the cover of shrubs, Peggy waddled out of the cat carrier in which she had been transported, into the company of other feathered watery birds. She stopped after only a few steps, but appeared unflustered or threatened by the activity of the other birds or the few people who were enjoying the riverside on an early Saturday morning. We had known, even without discussing it, that if there was any doubt in either of our minds about the duck's welfare, then we would reconsider their course of action and we would take her back home. Wishing to give the duck time to adjust to her new environment, though, we sought out a cafe where we'd be able to pass half an hour or so, and we stopped just a short distance across the road from the park. It was somewhere we'd been on previous occasions, and when inside we ordered a cup of coffee and a cake each before taking a seat by the window. The trees of the park largely shielded the river from view, though, and after a few minutes we returned. At the edge of the water, where we'd left our feathered charge, we received a pleasant surprise. There the duck was, bobbing around in the shallow water below and besides low branches of trees and roots which stretched out from the river bank. Peggy appeared happy and relaxed, not at all the way Stephen and I had seen her during previous attempts at conquering her fear of the wet stuff, and we felt our decision to give her the opportunity of a life in the wild was the right one. We said our goodbyes with a sadness, but that the idea of her finding a mate would leave her happy in the long run. And we returned home with an empty cat carrier. It's possible the greatest obstacle to Ma and Pa Duck hitting it off and having a family was something more fundamental than not getting on together. Although nothing was ever proven and no professional advice was sought, it was likely that Peggy was actually a painter of a pool, because in all the time she was part of the funny family, she never once laid an egg. So that's it. Tomorrow, the chapter 6 is entitled Melina, and we all know about her. Okay, see you next time.